You were talking about how there's informational noise and internal noise. Internal noise, I think, is quite interesting because I think a lot of us haven't really thought about that as noise before. How do you think people can deal with that internal noise in a different way than the auditory noise?
It was an interesting question for us because, as we mentioned, when we first wrote on this topic for Harvard Business Review, we were focused much more on this literal auditory noise. And as we started asking people about the deepest silence they've known, and we realized the informational and the internal noise was so central to this. And with that definition of noise, there's that which is interfering with our goals, interfering with our perception and intention, the informational noise on our screens and the internal noise in our heads is such a key part of that, especially these days. And we started seeing that there are real feedback loops between these different levels of noise. We studied the work of Florence Nightingale more than 150 years ago, who was convinced that noise was a driver of what we today know as the fight or flight response and is a force that denigrates our body's capacity for attention and also for healing, our brain's capacity for attention and our body's capacity for healing. So there's these feedback loops between the auditory noise, the informational noise, and the internal noise when we're caught up in the intense informational landscape of these days or the intensity of the soundscape, and that fight or flight mode is activated. Then there's a tendency to have more thoughts in our head, to have more distraction in our heads. So, in terms of strategies to deal with the internal noise, there's no one right way to do it. We don't want to be prescriptive in the book, but we explore a huge range of stories of what works for individual people. And back to this idea of there being feedback loops or links between the different levels of noise. One thing we've found that's extraordinarily helpful for being able to calm the chatter inside is to listen to silence in a literal way, to just step outside and tune in to the sound of the breezes and the branches of the trees, or the sound of the rain, or birds chirping. It can be something that's not technically silent, but something that's not making claims on you. Just tuning in and listening. There's research at Duke University Medical School that's found that the act of simply listening to silence, of trying to hear in silence, activates the auditory cortex in a way that actually regenerates brain cells. So, this act of simply listening, just tuning into silence, is something that can clear our heads in remarkable ways.